Hello everybody and welcome back to Deckled Edges. I'm your host Camilla, and today we're going to be talking about the blueprint for modern dystopian fiction, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So for some quick background on Huxley himself, he was a pretty well-known English satirical novelist born in 1894 in Surrey, England. His body of work was originally known for a witty satirical tone that satirized largely the intellectual and literary scene of his time. By the time he wrote Brave New World in 1932, this was a pretty significant turning point, especially in kind of the tone of his book. It was still a satire, it was still, in a way, a very exaggerated satirical play on the society of his time. But it is, like I said, the blueprint for modern dystopia. It is a vivid expression of Huxley's own distrust of the 20th century trends that surrounded him in politics, technology, and society. And it's basically presenting this nightmarish, distorted, and disturbing version of a future society that he had in mind, of how conditioning and control overtook and overran the society. And what makes it all the more disturbing is the fact that it's very familiar when you're reading it. It doesn't seem like it is all that far-fetched, because essentially all of the disturbing elements are exaggerations that aren't too far off of things that are already happening, or already were happening, I guess, in 1932. So one of the first things you kind of notice when you're reading this book is it starts off very disturbingly descriptive. And for me, I don't really get disturbed by books easily. I think that sometimes it's very almost easy to get desensitized, and in a sense it's easy to realize, oh, it's a book you're reading, especially when you're reading like a fantasy. I think that's very straightforward and obviously a lot of the time shocking, but what happens, but at the same time you kind of understand that that's part of the world building, that's part of the world. But because, like I was saying, what happens in this book is more so an exaggeration of current society, a lot of what they're saying is obviously unrealistic and fictional, but it's just presented in a way that is just gritty and almost like you're stepping foot in a sterilized lab and walking through it yourself and seeing just like unearthly horrors line the walls, and it's just easy, like it's just normal. But anyway, so yeah, that's the first thing I kind of noticed with this book. It was both what kind of deterred me at first, but eventually what ended up drawing me in. That's the kind of reason I decided to actually sit down and, finish this book, because it was a book that we were assigned for school, and that's often something that turns me off immediately, even if I know that obviously, it is a good book, but it just makes it more difficult to actually find the time for when it's something that's assigned rather than out of my own enjoyment. However, that description caught me off guard, and it kind of made me want to read more. So that's the kind of first thing that you'll notice, that especially with the director, and you're definitely thrown into this completely straightforward medical, clinical jargon that is has a particular cadence that is just continued throughout the book, that is part of that unsettling air that is part of this first part of the book, especially when you pick it up right away. It begins in the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center, and you're immediately introduced to what this community is called. It's called the World State. That is what they call the futuristic society that they're living in, the civilized part of the society. And you're introduced to their motto: community, identity, and stability. So right away you're hit by two things that are completely integral to this unsettling and distorted reality that you're in. You realize that there's a motto that this entire society is meant to follow, and it's something that is normally positive, but when immediately written following a conditioning center, it takes a more sinister look. It takes a more sinister tone, because community, identity, and stability are generally concepts that you can apply to perhaps institutions or groups of people, but when you apply them to an entire society, that just kind of screams control. Another important thing that you kind of notice pretty early on in the book is when this book is set. This book is set in the year AF 632. AF stands for after Ford, as in Henry Ford. Yes, the Henry Ford of cars and Model T. In this universe, Henry Ford is revered as godlike. They say, oh, Ford, or Ford willing, all that stuff. And this era in which, the world state was established is established to be after Henry Ford introduced his Model T. So obviously this is set in the far future. It's not necessarily set in 1932, but because of the rapid technological and societal and cultural advancements of the early 20th century around, the interwar years between the world wars in 1932, that was very much something that was an important symbol to Huxley of consumerism and just the overall feel of the society at the time. So it seemed like the perfect thing to hinge an entire religion basically on, even though it's not necessarily a religion. I don't think that's really established to be a concept in this. Actually, in the world state, religion is scorned and it's seen as primitive, as we'll get into later, but it's revered almost as people in religions revere a god or important figures. So that's one part of the framework of this world. The next part can kind of be condensed into the government is looking to create a society based on control and stability. Now, the stability part might not seem so bad, but when you realize that these world controllers, so they're called, is basically their version of the government, these pillars of people who actually understand what's going on, weren't necessarily brainwashed, but are the source of the brainwash, so they are kind of just as out of tune with what we would consider to be human emotions and empathy and consideration for life. However, what I was trying to say is that the stability comes at the cost of the qualities that make one human. The stability that they are seeking is built on efficiency and optimization of humans working and just overall keeping humanity alive rather than keeping the humanity of individuals alive. So overall, the government of the world state maintains order through advanced reproductive technology, which they call the Bokanovsky's process. This is one part of it. Most of what you need to understand about this is that in the society, anything based on just natural human reproduction is seen as erotic and disgusting, not just in a funny sense, in a genuinely repulsive sense, especially if they think that you're serious about it. In addition, it's not necessarily that the act itself is repulsive, but the idea that that is the process that leads to children and the continuation of humanity. That's the repulsive part, because in a different sense, this idea of intimacy is not even a concept. It's just continually encouraged. They have this motto that says everyone belongs to everybody else, and that's just, to a normal person, it's just a complete putting aside of any sort of moral or emotional attachment that would come with that sort of thing, and it just assigns everybody to have the same mentality of ownership and entitlement to another person, or any person basically, because there's no emotional connection, and there cannot be any emotional connection between two people, because that's seen as horrible, and essentially you're an outsider if you even begin to have those emotions. In addition, like I was saying, sorry, I got sidetracked, but the Bokanovsky process is this idea that they can take a singular embryo and use it hundreds of thousands of times to create hundreds or even thousands of sets of identical twins that are all identical to one another. And this is something that later on you see horrifies someone who doesn't come from the world state, who doesn't have that same brainwashed conditioning instilled into them, because it's just so unnatural. And this is made with the idea of creating infinite amounts of workers to basically fuel their ingrained social hierarchy that they genetically manipulate from birth. or from existence. I don't know, that's not really a thing anymore. So in addition to these advanced reproductive technologies, there's also this process that follows birth, I guess is what I'm going to call it. And it's a process of psychological manipulation and fitting every child basically into a social hierarchy that was predetermined, that they genetically engineered each child to fit a certain way, and then after they're born, they are essentially conditioned in their sleep. They call it hypnopedic conditioning, where they condition them with the mottos and the values of the world state, and they basically take different factors such as the smell of flowers, and they decondition or condition them to like it or not, and that is meant to create basically optimal people that will fit perfectly into the hierarchies and the rankings that they created for their society. This concept is essentially built upon the Greek alphabet. You have alphas, betas, gammas, deltas, epsilons, gammas, epsilons. My bad. But essentially, alphas are built to be the leaders, the scientists of the world, and then you have, worker classes, lesser people, like the people that were basically genetically engineered to do hard labor, and they were conditioned to like it. And then finally, the third and probably most prominent method that they use to have this entire uniformity in the masses of the world state is this drug called soma. And this keeps the population docile, content. This basically manufactures happiness and allows them to take breaks from anything that would previously be stressful. It's essentially just this mass sedation. There's three major characters that you kind of want to talk about, and that's going to be Bernard, Lenina, and John the Savage. Bernard Marx is an alpha plus, which is essentially like the highest tier in this hierarchy of humans in the world state, and he feels, however, alienated because he is physically small. He's not as good looking as the others, which I don't know what you would imagine someone from the world state to look like, because they have this weird unaging. I imagine them to look rather unnatural and like angular, if that makes sense. However, alphas are expected to be the prime version of humanity because they were engineered to be such. So he doesn't quite fit that mold. I think he's just short, to be honest with you. But he, because of that, feels alienated and honestly doesn't seem to share exactly the same cookie cutter values of the others in the world state, which is intriguing as a reader when you first kind of see that difference in the way that he even views Lenina, who he fancies, I guess, who he likes. However, that's also not really a thing in this world, so it is rather unusual for him to even think those thoughts or communicate them to the reader. In addition, Lenina is a beta in this world who adheres to the world state's norms, but she also becomes involved with Bernard because she's just intrigued by him in a sense, even though others ostracize him. But maybe that's why she's intrigued, to be honest with you. But it's not necessarily a romantic intrigue. It's just something that draws her to him because they're more so unfamiliar with the concept of actually being romantically involved. However, you see from early on that Lenina isn't exactly the same as the others around her. She doesn't follow this same concept of, obviously she does follow in a sense this idea of everyone belongs to everyone else, but she doesn't interact with it in the same way. She had this one person, Henry Foster, who she had continually been with, quote unquote, for around a month, and she had only gone out with him. And to her friend actually, this was really strange, and she was encouraged to go out with someone else because that goes directly against what the people in the world state are taught is normal. Everyone belongs to everyone else. Why would you consistently seek out one person? Anyway, so I think this is what draws her to Bernard and how they become involved and eventually want to visit the Savage Reservation, which is where John the Savage lives. He was born naturally on a Savage Reservation. By naturally, I mean through a mother and a father, which is extremely strange for this world state. It's seen as disgusting, and he's essentially just this specimen for people in the world state because he's different and no one in the world state is different. However, on the Savage Reservation, that's completely normal. So the weird thing about him, though, is that his mother is actually from the World State. So she was stranded in the Savage Reservation many years ago. And because of this, John was ostracized in the Savage Reservation. John is probably the most important character in this book, and the whole basis of the book is centered around him. While John never initially lived in the World State, his skin is fair, as are the people of the World State, and his mother is a direct biological tie to that life, obviously. It's simultaneously alien and familiar to him. To him, the World State is this brave new world, as he quotes, and is the title of this book. But he grew up being instilled with the values of a quote-unquote savage society on the reservation, which to us would be normal humans, but they have monogamous ideals, religion, and family, which are the primary values that have shaped his upbringing. Although he has also received counter values from his mother, who was initially ostracized from the Savage Reservation because she brought these ideas of promiscuity into the reservation from the outside World State and essentially tried to sleep with all of the women in the Savage Reservation's husbands. So she was pushed to the edge of society and brought John with her because of the stigma that he faced on accordance of his mother. So alongside these values that he picked up from the Savage Reservation, which is technically all he's known, he has also been exposed to the idea of another version of society through his mother. His mother would tell him stories. He had access to 2 books that he would read. He would read Shakespeare, which introduced him to these ideas of romance and this kind of savage society. But he had access to this book called The Chemical and Bacterial Conditioning of the Embryo, which is this introduction into the almost wondrous and incredible to him magical ideas of scientific advancements like technology that he has seen nothing of the sort on the Savage Reservation. His mother would also tell him constantly of life before the reservation, telling him incredible feats of humanity, like babies being born from bottles in a society devoid of illness. And in the sense, he was made to feel as if he had been exiled from the society where he belonged before he was even born. So this curiosity that led him to want to discover this outside world is essentially what led him to jump on the opportunity to do so when Bernard and Lenina visited the Savage Reservation and offered to take him out of it. After he leaves the reservation, his entrance into the World State is double-sided. He is automatically popular. People are fascinated by this curiosity of someone who is different and other in a society where everyone is homogenous and the same and doesn't have those feelings with which to or formulate a desire to be different. So in that sense, he is a curiosity, something that is so far from this ostracization that he experienced in the reservation. However, the beliefs and customs of the World State are foreign and horrifying to him. The depravity of the promiscuity that he witnesses, the lack of morals and the lack of empathy, the lack of the ability to feel happiness of someone's own accord without a drug is appalling to him. He does feel emotions such as lust, which are encouraged in the World State, towards Lenina. But the difference with how he handles this is that he is taught to keep himself in control and make sure that his actions, rather than his thoughts, even if his thoughts don't, his actions align with the morals that he was taught. However, in the World State, this is confusing. Linnea wonders why he doesn't act on his emotions, and in a sense, this kind of solidifies John's idea that the World State society is corrupted and depraved. All this sort of comes to a head when he meets the world's controller, Mustafa Mond. He explains to John that the ultimate goal of the World State is the stability and happiness that is reiterated in the motto and drilled into the brainwashed minds of children from young ages all the way to their adulthood. And to him, to Mond, those traits are worth more than retaining one's humanity. But this is absolutely opposite of what John believes and has come to realize is potentially the correct way of looking at the world. To him, Mond's admission is calloused and inhuman, and any action that the World State does, from the past and also this point forward, serves to highlight to the reader that the true nature of the world state is not hidden to any of the individuals in it, but only it requires an outside perspective who knows something other to realize that it is wrong. To be honest, this aspect of it was really the main thing that made this book stand out in my mind, because this idea that the true nature of what happened in the world state that would be seen as disturbing and immoral to the reader and to John, who had a different perspective. This idea that the very same actions can be perceived completely differently to a population that has been steeped in this mentality since the beginning of their existence. It just provides such a stark contrast that really highlights the dystopia of this universe, of this world, and the idea that there are people like us inserted into this world, and they're seen as the outsiders, they're seen as creatures that are beneath even the lowest members of the world state society, who are intentionally mentally disabled by the people who are the quote-unquote alphas in the society. The savages are seen as worse than that because at the very least, the epsilons and the deltas are aware of their role in society, and they would never even consider rebelling against that, since they were quite literally bred for labor and subservience, and they were also conditioned to like it, in a sense, if they can even like anything, because of the manner in which their deeply drug-steeped haze of their existence has dampened any shred of humanity remaining within them. All of this sort of culminates towards the end of the novel, as we see John's internal moral struggle, struggling with what he was taught to be right and what he inherently feels to be right, versus this incredibly conditioned society that is all-encompassing everywhere he turns. This world state mentality is ingrained within the entire, every single component of their life. And truly, it is easy to think that it might be a no-brainer to see the immorality of the society, but one must remember that aspects of world state life are alluring. To anyone, the notion of having a life without struggle and the ability to step away from any stressful event within a moment of just taking a singular drug, it could be enticing. And we see this as John struggles to bring into equilibrium this internal conflict between the allure of some aspects of world state society, like the popularity that he finds among the people, and the allure of the women of the world state, with the fact that, he was raised among people that the world state deems to be savages, and he knows that they're capable of experiencing feelings and emotion like love and humanity and happiness. And this ultimately makes any alluring aspects of world state society seem disgusting to him, which then brings into the discussion the somewhat disturbing end to the novel, in which, despite this lucidity that John feels and this stark immorality that he holds an opinion of that is world state society, he eventually falls victim to the temptations of this society, and they break through the morals that he attempted to uphold so fervently, and he succumbed to this aspect of promiscuity of world state society. And he was so disgusted with himself for falling victim to this temptation that he ultimately ended up killing himself out of distress and disgust at his actions. And this really goes to show the deep conflict that John felt, and it shows to the reader that no one, no matter how strong their morals are, is fully capable of resisting the all-encompassing immoral nature of not only world state society, but of the current society that they were living in at the time, and more so a commentary on how modern society mirrors this tempting yet immoral version of it, which is the world state. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Deckled Edges. I hope that you enjoyed and were able to find some peace of mind, some relaxation in sitting down with me and listening. I hope that you found another good book to read, even though this one was more on the disturbing, dystopian side of things. But I hope, nonetheless, that you enjoyed your time here with me. It's taken me a bit of a while to get back into the groove of recording and reading and putting out episodes, but from here on out, I am so excited to be able to be back and to be making more podcasts and to be reading more books. So stay tuned for more episodes, and I am so excited to be sharing it with you guys. Have a lovely, lovely day or night, and I will see you next time.